So, as you all know, today we're going to be talking about tracking down new and unusual reference types. So, this webinar is based on the hundreds and probably thousands of questions that we've gotten throughout the years, where there are a few new things based on new technologies or maybe some seldom used reference types that can kind of trip some people up. And we're here to talk about how you can kind of get to the bottom of how to find out how to cite these references. So next page, please. My name is Samantha Denany, and I'm here with my colleagues, Chelsea Lee and Timothy McAdoo. As you may know, we're all members of the APA Style Team, which is the team that is dedicated to creating, editing, updating, teaching, and promoting APA style guidelines, including texts like the publication manual and the concise guide. So thank you all so much. We're so happy to see you all here today. Next slide. So as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about tracking down some new and unusual reference types. We'll start by talking about general guidelines to follow when you're stumped by a source. We'll talk about uncommon reference examples. And then citing works with the same or similar sets of authors. And as I mentioned, we should have time for questions. So go ahead, get those questions in the Q&A as they come about, and hopefully we'll have some time to talk about them. Next slide. Chelsea? I'm sorry, did I just freeze? Okay, it looks like Chelsea's having some technical issues. So just give us 1 second. Sorry about that. So let's start by talking about some general guidelines to follow when you're stumped by a source. A lot of times when you come upon a new reference type that you've never cited before, you might feel a little bit nervous. It might seem a little scary. It might be something that you really don't know what to do, where to go, things like that. And really, one of the things we're here to talk to about is that even though these new and unusual reference types might seem completely different than something you've seen before, it really all comes down to the same general rules for citing a source. As you know, the point of APA style really comes down to writing with clarity, precision, and inclusion with the ultimate goal of excellence in communication. So we're not trying to, create different reference types to make things more confusing or make it a huge secret about where a comma or a period or an italics goes. Our goal is to help you reference or cite your sources in a way that leads to clear, precise, and inclusive communication. The purpose of references is something that can really help, especially if you're working with students who are just starting out, but in general, it's something to really think about if you are stumped with a source. The purpose of a reference comes down to 3 things. The first is to give credit where credit is due, which helps you write with integrity. It also supports the principles of clarity, precision, and inclusion, so a reader can understand what justifies your statements, and it helps readers to find and identify the source. So when you write a reference, if you are providing the information that can help your readers find that source that you're talking about, you're already well on your way to creating a perfect source. Creating a really fantastic citation. So one of the librarians I spoke to at a conference a couple weeks ago said that she tells her students that when you're citing sources, it's like you're dropping breadcrumbs for those for your readers, so they can kind of follow along the path and find out how you got to your conclusions. So really, no matter how complicated you think the source that you're writing is going to be, if it's a reference type that you've never seen before, really it's going to come down to answering our main four questions to build a reference. So it's going to start with who is responsible for the work, and that's going to get to the author. It's going to look at when was this work published, which is the date, the title, so what is the work called, and the source, where can I retrieve this work? So I know it gets a lot more complicated when maybe you don't have an author, or, things might seem like they're kind of pushed around in different places. But really what we're coming down to is how can you help your reader get to that source and understand how you came to your conclusions? So it really is going to come down to the basics of author, date, title, source, even if it seems much more complicated at the outset. Chelsea?
Hello, thank you all. So thank you, Samantha, for saving me after my computer decided to shut off. Um, so when you have the author date title source pattern underneath of everything, really there's only two format patterns that happen with APA style references. Either they're going to have italics on the title or italics in the source element. So an example of a work that has italics on the title would be a book. The title of the book is italic. An example of a source that has italics within the source element is a journal article, where the name of the journal, the name of the periodical is what is italicized. And then the name of the actual article itself is just presented in standard type. And so every reference is going to have something italic, and it's just a question of, is it going to be within the title or within the source? Go to next slide. So the way that the patterns are assigned is that works that stand alone use the italic title format. And this is most references. There's a long list of examples on the page of the works that use italic title. Some of those that you may be familiar with include books and reference books, dissertations, lecture slides, software, web pages, reports, gray literature, such as things like fact sheets or press releases, anything that's just its own little entity. And then for the next one, for works that are part of a greater whole, so let's show that. This one is going to have the name of the greater whole appearing in italics. So some examples of works that are part of a greater whole would be articles in journals, magazines, and newspapers. And then the name of the journal, the name of the magazine, or the name of the newspaper is going to be italic. Likewise, like an episode of a TV show, an episode of a podcast, an entry in a dictionary, it's always in something bigger. Or like an edited book chapter is in something bigger. And then the bigger thing, the work that stands alone, is the thing that's going to get italics. Next slide, please. So this is, I think, one of the most important parts of this presentation is that you've got to use information that is obvious in the references. If you are confused by the source that you're trying to cite, like you are thinking so much more clearly about that source than pretty much any reader is going to be thinking about it. And so it's important to use information that's going to be obvious to people who haven't thought that closely about the reference. So an example of this would be information that's on the title page or it's on the cover. That would be great kind of information to put in a reference. Information that would not be as helpful would be information from the website source code about, some detail that's maybe in the code if you look at it, but not obvious if you're just skimming or browsing the page. So it's got to be obvious. And you remember that it's not about providing exhaustive information. Not everything is going to make it in there. And sometimes it seems like there's too much and you want to cram it all in. It's just about giving enough that the person is going to know that they're in the right place when they look at the reference and they look at the work and they're like, yes, this is right. That's the goal of what you're going for. Okay, next slide. So, with all that said, there is a wide world of sources out there, and sometimes they do not fit neatly into the categories. And that, if that's the case, go back to author, date, title, source, probably with an italic title. Also, remember that it's less important how you specifically got to work than giving a path that will work for others. So, for example, like if you had a book and you checked it out from your library, you probably already know that like the person, your reader doesn't need to go to the same library branch that you went to. Like they might live somewhere else in the whole world. They can go to any library and get that book. Likewise, from an academic research database, like if your school academic research database links all require you to be logged into your school portal for them to work, that's not helpful if your readers are from anywhere in the world. You want directions that are gonna work for anybody to give them a functional path to the work. And when you zoom out and look at it, it's all just about author, date, title, source. That's gonna be the best path to get you there. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Great. So now we're going to transition into the section of the presentation about uncommon reference examples, starting out with talking about how on earth to cite artificial intelligence or AI references. As a preface to this, I would like to say that policies from schools, institutions, publishers vary regarding use of AI. Can you use it? Should you use it? It's all, everybody has a different policy. So look for policy if you're working within one of those environments. And if you are a person who is helping set a policy for your institution, it's important to be clear so that people know what the expectations are. Typically, use of AI needs to be disclosed in the text. You should tell people that you used it and what you did. However, we know that like sometimes the AI, like you might not even know that it's helping you, like it's getting incorporated into working with Microsoft Copilot, like it's in Word. And so you might not even know. So it's about doing your best to explain what you did and how, if you used AI, what you did. To give a reference for an AI, use the software reference format, which has, you guessed it, an italic title. And if you're not sure of what the details for author, date, title, source should be for the AI, try asking the AI, see what it says. So that's one of my tips for that. So let's look at the AI reference example, the examples themselves now, which are on the next slide. So here's two examples. We have a reference for ChatGPT and a reference for Copilot. Each of these references has author, date, title, source. You have the company that made the AI, the year it was most recently updated or got new information, the name of the model, and then in brackets, there's a description. And we use the bracket description large language model because that seems to be a good like summary of what this AI is. But the bracketed description information in APA style is always flexible. It's about explaining what it is. And so on the right-hand side of the screen, there is an image of a person reading a book. And I asked ChatGPT to make me this image. And then the Dolly AI within ChatGPT did it for me. And so if I had this figure in my paper, I would call it figure one, person reading a book. That's my title. And then in the image, the figure caption would explain where it came from, that it was created using Dolly as part of ChatGPT, and then give me the reference for ChatGPT. And that reference would be in my reference list, is how that I would do it. Let's go to the next slide. So a next kind of uncommon, difficult reference type is unretrievable online sources. Things that used to be there and now they're gone. What are you supposed to do? And first off, check whether the page has been archived. You can look in the Internet Archive, which is at archive.org. And the reference in that case would be the same as it ever would be, except the link works rather than going to somewhere that doesn't work. Alternately, if you have access to the information and like maybe you know it's going away, you can archive it yourself and link to it. Or if the source is gone, one of your best options might be to use a different source that is recoverable. However, there's lots of situations out there in which people are writing. So you might consider explaining what's missing. Like if something really important is gone and you don't want to use a different source, talk about it with your editor, with your advisor, with your instructor to figure out what's a good plan so that you can explain to readers what is going on and how, like why they should trust you. And the goal is to be a good record keeper for your projects. So like if you are doing data, keep good records of your own data and make sure that it is available for future readers. We go to the next slide. Okay, so this is another one. We have podcast references. So I know many people are really into podcasts, and whenever they advertise them, they're like available from wherever you get your podcasts. And it's true, they're available from so many places. They could be on Spotify, they could be on YouTube. The goal here is to write a reference that matches the information on the work that you used. And the premise is similar to like writing a reference for like a TV episode or versus a TV series in terms of the italic title versus italic source. So if we look at the next slide, which has the example references on it, here we can see an example reference for a whole podcast versus a podcast episode. And I showed them different just to show you what it would look like. This is an APA podcast called Speaking of Psychology. It's really great. You should check it out if you haven't heard of it before. But the reference for the whole podcast is going to put the name of the podcast in italics and describe it in brackets, what it is. It's an audio podcast. Who published it? Where did it come from? It came from the APA, from our website. That's where you can get it. But maybe you got your podcast from like you have an iPhone and you use your Apple Podcasts. That would be fine too. You can have a link that takes readers to the destination. If it's like on your phone and hard to get a link, you might need to do some digging around to find a link that's going to work for others. But ultimately, just give people a path that's going to get them to the work that you used. Next slide, please. So our next one is a webinar reference. So a webinar, just like this one, we use, again, the italic title format, but webinars can be archived and moved, like they can appear in a lot of different places. They can be on web pages, they put them on YouTube. Luckily, even if it's on YouTube, it is still the italic title format, even if it's on YouTube. And putting a bracketed description is really helpful because it'll help readers to understand what the reference is. So if we look at the examples on the next slide, then you'll see two ideas. First, maybe a webinar that you got it off of a website. And then the second, maybe it's archived on YouTube. In both cases, we have author, date, title, source, and providing a link that works, that takes you to what the thing is. And rather than worrying about like standardizing all webinar references ever, instead focus on author, date, title, source for the specific work that you use, giving readers a path so that they know they can get to it. And it's the same thing that you use and they know that you're in the right place. So now we're going to go over to Kim is going to talk about some more uncommon reference types. And then later we're going to get into putting everything in order in the reference list.
Okay, thanks, Chelsea. Let me just pull up my notes here. Okay, so yeah, next is legal references, and they differ from all of the references we've talked about so far, in that they don't follow the author, date, title, source format. And instead, for legal references, APA style follows. Oh, I'm being told we can't see me. One moment. Sorry about that. Instead, for legal references, APA style follows Blue Book style. And so, thus, for each reference, each type of legal source might be a little bit different. They're not quite as consistent as APA style references, depending on the type of source you're citing. So, uh, our recommendation would be to look at Chapter 11 in the publication manual, which outlines the guidelines and gives lots of examples for things like court cases, laws, patents, legislative materials, and so on. And you'll see that the templates in the examples in that chapter follow what you could also find in Blue Book. And if you're on a web page that's talking about a court case, and it gives a reference, it's largely going to be that same format. So you're usually good to just use what you find out there in the wild. One addition in the APA style version is that these references that we allow for a URL at the end, which makes the reference just a little bit more consistent with APA style references, and it also helps the reader get to your source. So next slide, please. Oh, one last thing, you don't have to go back, but the last bullet on that slide talked about how we find law school websites very helpful for examples and guidance, and the Cornell University site is a particularly good source. So here on this slide, you can see two examples of references in APA style for legal materials, and one is a law, one's a Supreme Court case. For all of these details, how we put those references together, I'd refer you to Chapter 11 of the publication manual, because legal references could really be a whole webinar. And if you're interested in that, let us know in the chat, because we're always kind of thinking about what our next topic should be. But for now, what I want to point out here on the slide is that the in-text citations that are under each reference, they do follow the general guideline of using the first two elements of the reference. So it's the first part of the reference, and then the second part of the reference make the in-text citation. So in that way, there's a little bit of consistency too. And next slide, thank you. So that ends our section about different types of references. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about how to order references, all these references in the list, and how to cite the references, and what we mean, how to cite references that are similar and what we mean by similar. So next slide. So to start with some basic principles of ordering a reference list, almost every reference entry will start with an author name. That's typically an author's surname, but it could be a single author name, a group author name like American Psychological Association, as the author of a report or a web page or a book. But when it comes to ordering the reference, it's easy to alphabetize the list because you're simply comparing the first word, whatever that word is, of the reference letter by letter to another reference to alphabetize. We'll see some examples on the next slide. The second sort of basic principle is that when a work has just one author, that reference is going to come before any other references that start with that same author and then co-authors. So a single author reference is always at the start. And so here are some examples. The first bullet before I jump to that list says that when alphabetizing letter by letter, nothing comes before something. And we use that in two ways that we'll show in these examples. First, when comparing the spelling of names, and then second, when comparing the number of authors in a reference. So if we look at the first two references here, CHO comes before CHOI because comparing those two names, CHO and nothing else comes before CHO and I. And Chelsea, if you're able to use that red dot, I can't quite tell because I'm looking at my notes, but hopefully that'll help us know which of these I'm talking about. The this slide is a little dense, but we'll get through it. So comparing the second and third references, those surnames are the same of the first author. And if we alphabetize letter by letter, we have CHOI, that's a match. So you continue, you ignore punctuation, and you look at the author's first initial. I saw a question in the chat about why we include initials. This is one reason. It helps distinguish and disambiguate references. So the next letter is an L in the gray highlights versus an N. And so ignoring the punctuation, we have L before N, and that's why those are in that order. Note also that in doing all this so far, we're ignoring the date. We'll get to when to consider the date, but so far, if letter by letter distinguishes two references, that's all you need to consider. Next slide, please. Okay, this is consider this a continuation of the same reference list. The next reference starts with CHOU, which came after CHOI above it. And it's a single author reference, so it comes before the reference with that same first author and additional authors. So another way to think of that is, again, that nothing comes before something. So we have a single author work. Plus, so you have a single author plus no second author versus a single author plus a few other authors. And again, we're not considering the dates at all at this point because the author names and the letter by letter are enough still to just distinguish and decide the order of these references. And then the last reference in this list is another case of nothing before something. So CHU nothing comes before CHU and a fourth letter, CHUA in this case. So all of those sort of guidelines about the order are outlined succinctly in sections 9.44 through 9.48 in chapter 9 of the publication manual. And then plenty of examples in our sample papers. We tried to make sure that considerations like this were in there so you could see these in a real paper. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So we made it through that. Now let's look at a few more general guidelines that you may have already picked up just from what I've been showing. First, when alphabetizing, we ignore spacing and capitalization and punctuation in terms of deciding the order. So you can see that there are some spaces in the first two names on this list. But in terms of deciding which comes first, you're comparing V to V. I'm looking at Van den Boomen versus Van der Kleij. So we're comparing V to V and then A to A until you get to a difference. So Van den, V-A-N-D-E-N, comes before Van der, V-A-N-D-E-R. And if you look at the second and third references, Vander K comes before Vander W because we're ignoring all those spaces. It doesn't really matter where they fall. Just consider them closed up. And then for the Vander Wall versus the next one, which is Van Overwall, you're comparing V-A-N-D to V-A-N-O and putting V-A-N-D first. Again, ignoring these spaces. And then the last one is easy. V-A-N-S comes before V-A-N-O because S comes before O. And we're ignoring the lowercase. So the capitalization is not relevant to the order. And then a question we're often asked is, do you need to capitalize that letter for consistency with the other references or because you're going to be citing it in text? And the answer is no, just keep it. That's the spelling of the author name. So if you cite it in text, it's going to match the reference. And if you start a sentence with like Van Sturkenberg et al. Found that there were differences. If you find that distracting, it's easy enough to change that to in their 2012 study, Van Sturkenberg et al. Found that. You don't have to do that. You can do that, but in either case, the capitalization should remain. Or or lowercase. It should be as the author spells it. Okay, next slide. So this is a slide about works that have similar authors. So if you have two or more references and the first author is the same in each, which is very common, you'll decide on the order of the references by doing this letter by letter comparison to the second author. Or if it's the second authors that are the same, you move on to the next author. So in this list, Ferranda and Baptiste is before Ferranda, Porter, and Fitwong because you're comparing letter by letter. And of course, in all three of those, Ferranda, comma, C is an exact match. So you're just comparing the second author in each reference. And then the last two references on this slide, you just extend that logic to the next author until you find a letter difference. Next slide, please. Okay, so in those examples, we knew how to order the references because we did find differences in the author names. And now we'll look at some where the author elements of the references are exact matches. And having these kind of multiple references to works by the same author or an exactly matching group of authors, 1, 2, 3, it's not really uncommon because no matter what your topic is, you'll find that there's an author or a group of authors who published a lot on that topic, and then you're citing a few of their works, and this just comes up naturally. So in terms of ordering the reference list, when we have an exact match in the author element of the reference, that's when we move on to comparing the dates, the second element of the reference. So for the first two on this page, all three authors in that first reference are an exact match to all three authors in the second reference. So we use the date and then we order them chronologically, 1961 before 1963. And the next two references are works by M.E. Heilman, and they obviously have the same single author in each reference. So they're ordered by date. It's 2001 comes before 2012. And then the last reference follows all of those because nothing comes before something. You had single author, Heilman works, and then that last work is one where Heilman had co-authors. So the order chronologically for works that are dated or chronologically, and the beginning is no date, undated works. You might have seen like an undated web page will have N period, D period, that would go first, and then anything dated, and then anything in press is the most recent. So one more thing on this page, looking again at the first two references, you can tell that they're ordered chronologically, but you may wonder what you would do if they were both 1961, and that is on our last slide in this section, which is next. So what does happen when two references have exactly matching authors and also matching years? In that case, you move to the third element of the reference. We talk often about author, date, title, and source. So you have exactly matching authors, exactly matching dates. You move to titles, and you just compare those titles alphabetically. And note here, this is a good example. You're going to always ignore a, and, or the at the beginning of a title if you're trying to decide the order. So you've placed Centers for Disease Control and Prevention 2022 data and statistics on autism spectrum disorder. That reference is first because that title is alphabetically first. And so you have the order, and now you just add the A and the B to the date that's already there. The date of the first reference is to 2022A, the second reference is 2022B. And then those letters will also appear in the in-text citations, so that when a reader sees those citations in text, there's no ambiguity about which reference you're referring to. And then the second set of references on this slide follows the same process. The author elements are exact matches. The years are exact matches, so you compare the titles, G comes before O, and you assign the letters based on that order. Okay, next slide. Okay, so believe it or not, there are still many other things we could talk about ordering references, but I hope that that covers some of the basic things you'd run into alphabetizing. And now I'm going to talk about how to cite these similar references. And the good news is that because we've done all the work in the reference list ordering, the citations are easy and this will go faster. So next slide. Starting first with just basic guidelines about how to cite. You have references with single authors, two authors, or three or more. And in each of those cases, the format for the in-text citations is simple. One author references are cited with the surname and the year. Two author references are cited with both surnames and the year. And multiple author references are cited with the first author's surname and et al, meaning and others, and the year. So next slide, please. And so then here we have one of the example lists from an earlier slide. On the left part of this slide, there's the list. On the right side is how you would cite those works if you were citing them all together like this. You can see now that we've determined the order in the reference list, the in-text citations are easy enough. They match the author name element and the year element. So the Bandura references have three names and they use the et al form, and your citations are Bandura et al, comma 1961, comma 1963, and the citations for the Heilman reference are simply Heilman 2001 or Heilman 2012, or if you put them together, they'd be Heilman 2001, comma 2012. So next reference, or next slide, please. Yeah, and so likewise, these are more of what the references we looked at earlier. These are cases where the author element and the date element were perfect matches, so we added those A's and B's. And because we did that work in the reference list, the citations are simply matching the year as it appears in the reference. So the author names match the name in the reference and the dates match with the letters assigned. Okay, one more slide on confusing citations. And this is maybe one of the most complicated cases. Usually, so we have two references here. They both start with the same first author and they both have the same date, but they have different authors in second and later places. So usually, if you were citing either one of those, it would just be Ferranda et al. 2016. But because you have them both in the same paper, you can't use that abbreviation for both because it's and that's why it's on the incorrect line at the bottom. So it's the correct formatting, but not if you have them both in the same paper, because if you cited them that way, the reader can't tell which one you mean every time all throughout your citations. So to clarify that, when you find that two different references in your list would both use that same et al abbreviation and have the same date, you just spell out an extra author name in each of the citations. So if you look at the correct line on this slide, the first reference is cited as Ferranda Baptiste et al. 2016, and the second is cited as Ferranda van Graafveld et al. 2016, and the reader then has no trouble navigating to the references that match that and knowing which reference you mean. And then if the third authors were also a match, you would just keep spelling out author names until there's a distinction that's clear, even if that means spelling them all out at some point. So over to, I believe, Samantha.
Thanks so much, Tim. And thank you all for having your questions going and your interactions in the chat. We have just a couple more slides before we turn it over to questions. But one of the things you probably noticed throughout the presentation is that our goal is, when we're talking about references and citations, is to tell you how to tell the reader what you're doing, not whether or not you should, right? So we are not here to say you are allowed to cite this website, but not that website. That's something that comes from having a deeper understanding of information literacy, which is what we're trying to help students and editors and things like that with a new handout that we just released. It's a free handout on our website, and it's going to help help users to evaluate online sources to see if there's something that they should or shouldn't be citing in the first place. So this is going to walk them through, is this clickbait? Is this trustworthy? And what are the things that they can notice in this source that are going to help them decide, is this something I should be citing in the first place? So if you have questions, or if you teach students, this is something that I would really recommend sharing with them. And as I mentioned, it is free on our website. So please take a look. It's going to provide a lot of really good information that'll help your students, because it's not only important how you cite something, but it's important to have the knowledge to know, should I be citing this or not? So please take a look at that. It's a great new tool. Another thing that you might have seen recently is that APA Style is releasing our first institutional version of the publication manual called APA Style Manual. So for those of you who maybe are librarians, maybe you work with, an institution, it might be interesting for you, the possibility of making the publication manual and some other tools available to your entire school. We're coming out with this in summer 2025. We have the QR code here as well. Robin will be dropping a link into the chat, but we'll be able to provide more information this summer. So if you sign up to learn more, you'll be the first to know when we release more information, including things like demos, and things like that. So basically, it's just another way to get APA style information. Nothing's going away. If you love your print copy of the manual and that's how you like to consume this information, no worries. It's just another way to potentially get access to the pub manual to more people. So also, before we get into questions, we're not going to be able to answer every question. And I did notice that a few people have raised their hand, and we're not going to be able to answer questions live. So if you would be able to put your questions in the Q&A, that would be fantastic. But if we don't have time to get to your question, or if you have questions that are very specific to your needs, maybe a paper you're writing, you can always email us at our style expert email, which you're going to see on the side right there, styleexpert@apa.org, and you can get help from one of our fantastic style experts. You can also see more information on our website. And of course, the publication manual, concise guide to APA style, and the Mastering APA Style Student Workbook. We also have all of our socials down here. So we're going to dive into questions, but if you haven't had, if you need more information, please feel free to reach out to us after this conversation. So we do have quite a few questions. I'm going to try and group some of them together. There have been several questions asking about different citation management tools and different kind of online tools that people might use in order to kind of make their lives a little bit easier. So somebody mentioned in the chat using things like AI tools in order to cite sources, using things like EndNote or other citation tools to cite sources, and things like that. So what we generally say with regards to that is if you find a tool that makes your life easier in terms of formatting a citation, that's awesome. But the time that you save in using that tool, make sure you invest at least some of that into editing, checking, and making sure the information that comes from those tools is correct. So the research that we have, especially regarding like generative AI citations, is that there are many, many mistakes. So if you like to use those kind of tools, make sure you're really spending time checking them, seeing what's available. And whenever you're using AI, when you're citing a source, make sure that you're the one who has specifically read that article yourself. Maybe an AI tool helps you to understand what you're reading, but you need to be the one reading it. Chelsea and Tim, do you have anything to add? Nope. Okay. Along those lines, there are actually a couple of questions about using the alpha alphabetizing function in Microsoft Word. And we generally love when people make their lives a little bit easier by using tools in Microsoft Word. Things like using Word's hanging indent function, formatting tools. Have you guys used the alphabetizing tool yet? And is it correct? Chelsea or Tim?
And used it. Have you, Tim?
I have seen some, YouTube videos where people demonstrate it. It seems to work, but I haven't tested it against the level of, difficulty
Yeah,
we might have here.
I can imagine it would be very helpful as like a first pass to get things
Yeah.
into order. Just check.
Yeah, I mean, I have to give a plug to the academic writer, which does this perfectly,
Yeah,
based on the guidelines that we've, developed.
yeah. So Academic Writer has APAs, reference management software in it. And like all the people who are here today talking with you all, we all have a hand in helping making Academic Writer. Whereas like the other software, we don't like know them. They don't come to us and verify whether it's right or wrong. So you have to see with each tool.
Great, thank you. We had a question from Whitney about trying to cite sources that have um, authors from non English speaking or non-Western countries where they have some different ways of putting in like author information. So in this case, it was Indonesian authors, and they used indicators like firstborn, um, other words than like Mr. and Mrs. How would you go about figuring out what to do when it is a different culture and maybe you're not familiar with the typical APA style way of putting the names?
That's a really great question. And it's an interesting question because the way the names are presented does differ all around the world. And if you're writing within a global context, you eventually start learning about the different ways that names can be presented. And so, with like, for example, Indonesian names, sometimes people have just like a one word that's their name, or like they were saying, the other pieces that maybe you're not sure what to do with it. A first suggestion is to look at how others have cited those authors and copy what everybody else is doing. That way it's consistent. The second thing is that you never want to make the task harder for readers. So, like if you have an Indonesian author who only has one name, you would not want to abbreviate that to an initial, because then you've like disappeared the information that would be helpful to readers being able to locate and identify the source. And so, usually you might end up putting the information in, and the way that seems most straightforward to you of having like what's the surname or the family name and what are the given names. And I know there's related questions about when people have surnames that are two words. like maybe you have a surname from your mother and a surname from your father, and do you include both? And depending on what country you live in or the culture that you're from, there's different like practices about what people commonly do. As far as APA style is concerned, look at how others are citing that work and copy what they're doing. And if you're not sure, you can look at the author's webpage if they are maybe a university professor and see how they cite themselves. That can be a good way to figure it out. Or else you just pick. And it's fine for people to have multi-word surnames. That is a-okay, very common thing to have. And then it can be helpful to people to see more information rather than less.
Great. Thank you, Chelsea. One question that I thought was interesting with regard to AI, somebody asked, how might a student cite a translation of an article completed using an AI tool from a language they are not familiar with into a language they understand more? To this, you might not like what I have to say, unfortunately, for this student, but I would not recommend, if they can't read the article itself, I don't believe an AI translation would be enough. But Tim and Chelsea might disagree with me. We generally believe that you should be able to read the article itself. Even if AI is helping you with elements of it, using a complete AI translation, there might be just too much room for inconsistencies and things like that. But Chelsea, Tim, what do you think?
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
Okay, great. Um, let's see. There's some questions about when there is no date. Generally, Chelsea, do you want to just
No date is surprisingly easy. What you do if there's not a date of publication that's obvious to use is you use the abbreviation ND, N period, D period, which stands for no date. And you would use that in place of a year in the reference list and in the in-text citation. A common case when that is used is stuff that's on web pages, and maybe at the bottom of the website it says like this content copyright 2025 by the organization, and it's like the same footer on every page of the website, and you don't really know when the content was written or when it was posted. That would be a case where you might use the no date ND placeholder in your reference in your citation.
thanks. Derek has a question. How should you cite PDFs found on websites? I have found a lot of nursing students referencing PDFs found on websites. And personally, I have found the same thing where I will maybe Google something, I'll be taken directly to a PDF, and it can be a little bit difficult to know what to do with that. So what would you guys say?
PDF of what? What is it? That's what you got to figure out. You got to
Mhm.
look at it and say, is it a report? Is it a journal article? What is it? Hopefully it's labeled.
Yeah, I
Um,
can imagine that some people might want to just treat it as a web page in order to not do that deeper dive, but a lot of times it is a journal article or something like that.
yeah, I mean, so if it's a journal article, that would be an interesting one because a journal article would have indications of what journal that it's from.
Hmm.
And many journals, not all, but many of them had like the word journal in the name of, or you would see things like, the name of the journal and a volume number down at the bottom in the corner to indicate to you that this is coming from a bigger, a bigger thing. Um, if it's more, if there isn't the details about a journal, it's usually a report, and using the report reference format probably solves the problem. And
Great.
that's the one that has italic. It has italic title, that one.
Thank you. Um, there's a couple of questions on what to do when it is a instead of an author, there's an organization. One question is, what if it's an organization that's a subset of another organization? And another person asked about 2 or 3 organizations. So what do we do when it's not just as simple as, you know, just a certain, like one specific organization?
I'll answer that one first. And there are guidelines in the manual for both situations. So with multiple organizations, it's just as though it was multiple people. I mean, you just put let's say it was the American Psychological Association and the American Heart Association. Just that's exactly what you would write in the reference. And then in the citation, that's 2 authors. If it was 3 organizations, and then it would be the first author et al. In the citation and all 3 spelled out in the reference. So it's just consider those as single authors. They're a single group of, group authors. And the question about when there's a division within an organization, I'm trying to look this up quickly to find it's not a short answer, but Chelsea, do you have
Yeah, I feel like
succinct
it's
way for
coming
that?
back to the question of who's responsible. And like a good example would be the CDC references that were within our presentation. And looks like the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is part of the US Department of Health and Human Services, which is a part of the federal government, which is part of the United States, which is part, like, it could go on and on and on. And so I do appreciate the situation in which you feel like you have like so many layers that you're like, goodness, certainly there has to be an end. I would look at the source itself, and on the page where you are, figure out like what is being prominently credited. So like if you're on the CDC website, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as an author is a good choice because it's like the whole website is branded as being from the CDC, even though that's a department of the US Health and Human Services. So that once again, that when someone is reading your reference and going to the source to see what it is, that they know that they're in the right place. And then when you have the list of the parent agencies that go in the source element,
That's what I was trying to find. I just
you
put that
never
in.
remember what order they go in.
I know this, we look this up I do anyway. It's section 9.11, the 3rd bullet. So that outlines exactly what you do.
Exactly. So that's just like we use our own books here, but the goal is to try to be helpful to your readers, to provide information about the source.
Right.
If you've done that, that's good.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. We are at time. So I know, unfortunately, we're not able to answer every single question live, but as I mentioned, our APA style expert email, we do have some fantastic people who can answer your questions through email. So go ahead, send them an email. We also have all of our social media. And as I mentioned, you're going to be receiving a follow-up with some links. And this webinar, as well as all of our webinars that we've done recently, and a lot of other great information is on our YouTube channel. So definitely take a look at all that. Pay attention to your email. We'll be sending you more info. And if you are interested in more information on APA style manual, sign up to be notified when we have more information. And yeah, we're really thankful that you guys took an hour out of your day to chat with us. So
Absolutely. And when you do send your questions, if it's about a specific case, it's always so helpful to send links to the thing that you're wanting to cite, because that just like helps us get to the specific case that you're working on, so that we can help you understand the rules and how they apply, or the guidelines and how they apply, as well as looking at each individual case.
great. Thanks, everyone.